Oh, thank you for joining me today while I share our work on the Caribbean-Appalachian Transect as a critical corridor for mosquito-borne diseases. I want to point out that this that I'm presenting today is a small part of a global, or at least hemispheric level study that we have going on, where we're looking at geographic variations in the distribution of mosquito populations. Today, we're going to be talking specifically about this transect. This is probably the most important of the transects because this is the Caribbean-Appalachian Transect, which has been a major corridor for distribution of various vectors, especially mosquitoes and vector-borne diseases, for several centuries. We've known this for a long time, of course, but it was pointed out very clearly in recent years because in just the last decade, we have had two major mosquito-borne diseases, both transmitted by Aedes mosquitoes, that have moved for the first time ever into the Western Hemisphere, Chikungunya and Zika. And in these cases, both of them utilized this corridor between North America and South America through the Caribbean Basin to spread. We have set up a study in the area, and we have put together sites on 8 different islands within the Caribbean Basin, all the way to those islands just off the north coast of South America, up through the Central Caribbean, finally making mainland fall in Florida, and on up then to the area north of the coastal plain and the Piedmont into the foothills of North Georgia, and finally on top of the Cumberland Plateau of Tennessee. You can see the specific sites on the left there at various elevations. But this shows you why this Cumberland Plateau is a very interesting, a very important place for studying distribution of vectors. You can see on the left the basic extent of the Cumberland Plateau. In the figure in the center, you can see that topographically. You can see the Blue Ridge Mountains here and then the Cumberland Plateau here. And the most important image here is this. This is just from a recent snow and ice storm showing how the snow and ice extends down through the southern Appalachians, all the way through the southern states along the plateau. And you can see very clearly how this would be a barrier for movement of vectors from the southern coastal plains into American heartland. Going back to the Caribbean now, we go from island to island, again, 8 islands. So we use a portable packet that we carry with us. We have handheld microscopes that are adequate for seeing images like this mosquito here. That's adequate for identifying these mosquitoes, especially when we are focusing on urban areas and a relatively limited number of mosquito species. We also use vials like this for human landing catches, and we take water samples from bromeliads, from flower pots, from other locations using a valved basting bulb. We also use human landing catch techniques to get adult mosquitoes here. We do this working in pairs, and on each of these islands, we'll spend one day, specifically 3 hours of intensive searching on foot with 2 people working side by side. And when we do the human landing catches, we do it together, both for safety and also for effectiveness in collecting the mosquitoes. Well, of the 8 islands that we have visited so far, we have found mosquito populations on 4 of these in the urban centers. Here was the first one in St. Kitts in 2018, and right here in the most heavily trafficked part of town, you have a very large population of Aedes aegypti mosquitoes breeding in the flower pots, and you can see them here, also breeding in storm sewers. In San Juan, Puerto Rico, we have a similar situation, except that in San Juan, they do a better job of draining their flower pots, but they have neglected to pay attention to the wells that house their water meters. These, of course, are very close to human habitations. The rainwater runs down into the wells, and there you have large breeding populations of mosquito larvae. Similarly, in Tortola in the British Virgin Islands, you have situations in street drains where you have a buildup of a lot of Aedes aegypti larvae. Also in tires, like you have here on the left, that are set out for seating pedestrians, they fill up with mosquito larvae. In Charlotte Amalie and St. Thomas, the U.S. Virgin Islands, you have discarded trash that holds water that we've found mosquito larvae in. Also, in the alleyways in the urban area, you find the mosquito larvae in flower pots. And even in outdoor restaurants and bars and cafes, you have these decorative fountains, which often will have large numbers of mosquito larvae living in them. Well, once we get to the mainland, we take on different techniques and we do more robust collecting because we have access to our laboratories as well as to more collecting material that would be difficult to carry in the very mobile situation across the Caribbean islands. So we have here the BG Sentinel traps. We also have CDC light traps. We use CO2 and octanol as lures. The first place that we hit coming up out of the Caribbean is the Everglades. The Everglades are still very, very low in altitude, and it's populated out in the center of the glades primarily by native mosquitoes, voracious feeders, but fortunately not important disease vectors like these Sporophorus species and others. But if you move to the east into Miami, or if you move it to the west to Naples in these urban areas, you get into places where even though you have these multi-million-dollar mansions and very chic boutiques and restaurants, you nevertheless have flower pots with lots of Aedes aegypti breeding, as well as bromeliads and other places that we have found the mosquitoes breeding in this area. These are mostly Aedes aegypti, but at this point you do begin to find some Aedes albopictus, as well as the local Aedes tenuricus salt marsh mosquitoes. As you move on up across the coastal plain up to Piedmont, the very base of the Appalachian Mountains, you find the Berry College campus. This is a very important working campus. It's the largest university campus in the world with 108 square kilometers almost of land and lots of different habitat. And so with this varied habitat, we do a lot of robust collecting. And we have come up with 36 species of mosquitoes that live there and that breed there. And included among those are Aedes albopictus and Aedes japonicus, two invasive species that can carry a number of diseases. We do not at this point in history have Aedes aegypti this far north, though it has been there in the past. As you move on up to the northernmost point and on top of the Cumberland Plateau, you're now at a much higher elevation. And in fact, a lot of the people that live there moved to that location even back in the 1800s to escape the diseases of summer. The University of the South, where the campus of which we work on, was established in the 1850s there specifically to get the students away from the diseases of summer and up onto the top of the mountain where it was noted that you did not have so much of the malaria and yellow fever. Now, of course, we know that that was being transmitted in the lowlands by mosquitoes. And one of the people that made that very obvious to us was William Gorgas. And William Gorgas actually lived in this location on the University of the South where his father was president. Now on the campus, there's a Gorgas Hall named after his father, and there's a stained glass window dedicated to William Gorgas himself because of all that he did for our country in terms of mosquito control. If you look here, though, as you expect, you're at a higher elevation, so you have a lower diversity from 36 down to 26 species of mosquitoes, and you also have a lower abundance, and you also have less domination by the invasive mosquitoes. So although you have Aedes albopictus and Aedes japonicus up here, they do not dominate. Instead, you have domination more by Aedes triceriatus and Aedes hendersoni, which are local woodland tree hole breeding mosquitoes that live in this area. So we were the first to establish that, in fact, the Cumberland Plateau is home for breeding populations of Aedes japonicus. It had already been established that that was true for albopictus. And in fact, this last summer, we have located breeding sites. And again, as within the Caribbean, you have them breeding in flower pots that are left out. This is Aedes japonicus. And so we have our work cut out for us. I appreciate you taking the time to listen and wish us luck as we continue our work on this major corridor for vector dissemination. Thank you.